In Surah Luqman, ayah number 12, at Surah number 31, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, He says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ أَنِشْكُرْ لِلَّهِ وَمَنْ يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمَنْ كَفَرَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. Allah says, certainly we have given Luqman wisdom, hikmah. So be grateful to Allah. And whosoever is grateful to Allah, he is grateful for his own self. And whosoever denies his favor, indeed Allah is free of need and he is indeed praiseworthy. So when you thank Allah, Allah doesn't need your thanks because he is independent of everything. He doesn't have any needs. So when you thank Allah, it's for your own benefit. And then, he says Allah is praiseworthy. Now, interesting question to ask is, the final book of Allah, the Quran, right? From the time it's been revealed to the day of eternity, right? And the book is actually a very small book, right? It's actually 1/4 the size of Bible. Now, a lot of times, a lot of things are actually repeated in the Quran, and there's certain things that are actually by itself, right? And one of the stories or the words of one individual is Luqman, Hazrat Luqman. His words are captured in the Quran. So Allah could have taken any prophet, right? Because we said 124,000 prophets, right? Allah said, I sent a prophet on every community. So He could have taken the words of any prophet. However, Luqman is also not a prophet either. So He chose to actually capture what Luqman said. And then not only that, from there till eternity, because this book is going to be there from the time it was revealed till eternity. So what is so special about what Luqman had to say about what he said, and what is he saying in the Quran? Now, a little bit background on Luqman. Luqman was like a wise man, right? Because Allah says he gave him hikmah, right? And then the thing is, he was not a prophet, right? And it's very famous in Arabia, right? It was just like the Chinese have the Confucius, where he has these sayings, right? So if today we call somebody Einstein, right? So that's kind of similar. When somebody was intelligent or smart, or you wanted to say something, they'll call him Luqman. So Luqman was that type of personality. So we have to ask the question, like, what exactly was Luqman trying to tell? And by the way, he was telling something to his son. So it's the scene is that he is doing a wasiyah, right, to his children, to his sons, about what to follow based on his life experiences and what he learned over his life and what Allah gave him. So Allah said, I gave him wisdom. So from whatever that wisdom is, He's giving some choice things that He's telling His sons that will make them successful not only in this world but in the akhirah, right? So then the question becomes, what is this concept of wasiyah in Islam, right? So there's the wasiyah that Luqman is giving his sons, and then we have to go back and look, what does wasiyah really mean, right? When you are doing a wasiyah, right? What does it mean in Islam? How do you make a will, right? And then you have to also ask the question, when you make a will, what is the right way to make the will based on the Sharia and Islam, and how do you make a will? Right? And then you also have to ask the question, if you're preparing for the akhirah, then you have to also take certain things into consideration. How do you take into account certain things that you have to do for this dunya, for your family? So what can certain things you can do for your family while you are there? And then how can you prepare yourself for akhirah? And then not only that, set up your family for success based on what you have. And then the simplest one is it's not the simplest one, but one of the most beautiful pieces of advice, right, has been given by Imam Ali alayhi salam, salawat. In Nahjul Balagha. So so what can we learn from the will of Imam Ali alayhi salam to Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain, right? And this will is captured in different spots and places in Nahjul Balagha. So how can you take some of those lessons and the will that Imam Ali? So you have one, Luqman talking about his wasiyah in the Quran. We're going to talk about how to do a wasiyah based on like the Sharia, and then we also want to go learn from what Imam Ali was telling Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain, right, when he was doing his wasiyah. And that's kind of spread across Nahjul Balagha, but there's different places that you can capture. So let's go look at what Luqman said to his sons, right? Because that's first and foremost, because that's the topic I raised, right? So in Surah Luqman, I started with saying first, Allah says that we taught Luqman to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you're doing it for your own self. And then he warns his sons not to do shirk. He says, "Oh my son, do not associate anything with Allah. Indeed, association with him is a great injustice." Our Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, he says, Allah can forgive all sins up to the day you are died, right? But the one sin that cannot be forgiven is shirk, right? So you have to make sure. And then yesterday also we were looking at the 10 commandments, right? What was Allah talking about? Don't do shirk, right? And then second thing he says is, and we have enjoined upon man to do what, right? Do ihsan to his parents. So thank Allah, don't do shirk, and oh, by the way, thank your parents. And then he says, his mother, so he's emphasizing the importance of his mother, right? So he says his mother carried him in weakness upon weakness. And then she basically took care of him for 2 years, right? Weaning in 2 years. And that's kind of a sunnah, right? That, it's highly recommended for women to actually breastfeed the child for up to 2 years, right? So that's kind of one of the things, instructions Allah is giving us. And then he says, be grateful to me. So first he started with shukr, then said shirk, then said be thankful to your parents, and then he turns around and says be thankful to me and be thankful to your parents. So do ihsan. So somebody asked Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, right? Salawat. What does doing ihsan mean to your parents, right? Well, how do you do ihsan, right? So he says the simplest way to do ihsan is actually you do something for somebody before they even ask you about something. So, that's a very important concept to think about when you are talking about your parents, that you actually do ihsan to your parents before they even ask you to do something. That's the level of ihsan or goodness you're supposed to do with them. And then, why be thankful to parents? Because if you realize what is Allah saying in this ayah, He says, they actually raised you from weakness. So what is the first thing as a child you always see? You see your mother and you see your father. And they are Allah's representatives on the earth to take care of you. So if you don't even know how to thank your parents, right, who have been provided by Allah to you, how are you going to be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So very interesting way of looking. If you just read the ayah, it actually flows on its own like that. So if you want to be thankful to Allah, which He says, by the way, if you're thankful, you're doing it for your own good. But then He says, be thankful to your parents. Learn how to do ihsan and be thankful to your parents. And then he continues, right? He says, if they endeavor to make you associate, remember he talked about shirk, right? So on one hand, he's saying extreme level of ihsan and shukr to your parents, but then says, if they ask you to do shirk with me, of which you have no knowledge, then do not obey them. So if they ask you to do shirk or disobey Allah, don't obey them. And to me is your return, and I will inform you about what you used to do. However, right, that does not excuse you from actually not doing ihsan and shukr still to your parents. Even when they tell you to do shirk, don't obey them only in that matter. You still have to do shirk, you still have to do shukr, and you still have to do ihsan to your parents. So that comes as a very important lesson in there, right? And then he continues, he says, oh my son, indeed, if wrong should be the weight of a mustard seed and should be within a rock or anywhere in the heavens or on the earth. So even if it's a small mustard seed that is hidden inside a rock, somewhere in the heavens or somewhere on the earth, so it's hidden somewhere, right? Allah will bring it forth out. Right? Allah is indeed subtle and acquainted. So He actually knows everything. So the part about this is that Allah's wisdom, right, is infinite. And He knows every little, even a mustard seed hidden inside a rock somewhere in a desert, right? Allah, He says He will bring it out. So Allah has this omnipotent knowledge that is there everywhere that everybody can see. Now, the other thing he says, he continues, right, in the next ayah, he says, oh my son, establish prayer. Establish salat. And then do amr bil maruf and nahi anil munkar. And then he says, be patient over what befalls you. Indeed, all that is of the matters requiring determination. So, basically he's saying that, it's actually very well known that, if you want to stay away from evil, right, namaz or salat is the best solution. As-salatu umududdin. Salat is the foundation of everything that we do. And then he says, enjoying good and forbid evil. And then not only that, he says, be patient. Now Allah says, I'm going to test you with hunger, right? With loss of life, fear, loss of wealth. So all those tests are going to come to you. And if you learn not to be patient, right, then you will indeed go astray. Because Allah says when He puts those tests in you, there is khair in it for you. There is goodness in those tests for you. So if you learn to be patient in those tests, you will indeed be successful. And then He says, be humble. So that's the next ayat. He says, do not turn your cheek in contempt towards people. Don't walk as if you have held, you accomplished something in this life and you are feeling so proud, right? And do not walk through the earth exultantly. So don't, we looked at the story of the two gardeners, right? He says, what did he say? He says, Ana akhtara minkum, right? I am more than you in wealth and I have more izzah than you. So he's putting himself in there, he's doing shirk, and not only that, he's practicing arrogance. So what does it do, right? Allah does not like everyone self-deluded and boastful. So if you are boasting about it and you are self-deluded, then Allah says, I don't like that. So that's one thing Allah doesn't like, is arrogance. Right? And then he says, and be moderate in your pace. So when you're walking on the earth, walk gently and lower your voice. Don't have the loudest voice, right? Don't be boastful, right? And then, this is the interesting, like, yesterday also I read an ayah that we're going to read in Surah Jummah where he says, the example of the people who carry the books on their back, right, without understanding is like a donkey. Here again, Allah uses the word donkey. He says, the most disagreeable of sounds is the sound of a donkey. So if you are boastful, right, and you are arrogant and you're not moderate in your pace, Allah thinks that's like a donkey brain. That's the sound of a donkey. Which is very interesting, right, when you look at it from that perspective. So now let's ask the question, right, what is this will? Right, so this is the will he gave to his sons, right? Now, wasiya means, you designate portions of your estate, right, or give specific instructions that you need to happen after you pass away, right? You have, 4 key terms in it. One is the will itself, right? So it's the document or whatever instructions there are. You have the person who is called the al-musi, or the person who's doing the will himself, right? You have the wasi, who's going to be the executor of your will. You're going to be having the willed entity, something you're willing. So whatever it is, wealth, possessions, right? And then the beneficiary. So there's like 5 elements in this particular case, right? Now the will can be done verbally also. It can be done by writing, or it can be even done by ishara, right? So you can actually even indicate the will per se, right? Now the will or the wasiya is limited only to 1/3 of your estate. You can only do will on the 1/3 of your belongings, right? Because the other 2/3 actually belongs to the way Sharia has determined how you can hand it out. Now, if for whatever reason one of your beneficiaries says that, hey, I don't want to control what happens to it, and they give their consent that it doesn't have to happen by the Sharia, then you can, distribute that part based on how you want it. But once they give the agreement, then it's done. However, the other people, if there's other people and they don't agree, then they get their portion based on whatever Sharia has defined. Now, there's 2 types of will. One is where you actually give the full control and the ownership to the beneficiary, right? So that's that. And then the other one is called, so that's called at-tahlikiya, right? The other one is called al-ahdiya, where you actually assign the responsibility, but you don't transfer the ownership. So you have somebody who can do the things with it, but he's not the owner. The other one is where he can do things with it and he's the owner. So those are the two types of wills you can do. The condition for the person who's doing the wasiya, right? So what is the condition for that? So he must be baligh, right? So a non-baligh person cannot do it. You have to be sane and mentally competent, right? And you have to decide out of your own free will, right? There shouldn't be pressure on you to actually do the will, right? Now, if for whatever reason, and this is an odd question, right, I might as well answer this, it's in here, right? So, one of the things is if somebody commits suicide, for example, and they are the persons doing the wasiya, whatever instructions they've given as far as the money part goes, that cannot be honored. But however, if they have given instructions with regards to the non-money elements, those still have to be followed. So that just gives you an idea about if somebody commits suicide, right? For example, the person who's the wasi, so what is his condition? Again, must be sane, must be trustworthy, right? Must be a Muslim. And then, the role is actually wajib, obligatory on you. Unless you go and tell the person who's making you the wasi, say, I don't want to do it. Now, if the person, made you the wasi and they are not capable of hearing your objection, then it becomes wajib on you. You have to actually execute the will. The general rule. So the first rule is that when you have the will, right, how does it work, right? So the first part is you have to cover all your debts from your estate, right? And then any other religious obligations. So if you have homes, you have, leftover zakat, you may have leftover prayers, you may have leftover fast, right? Any of the religious obligations that may become valid, you may have not prayed for 30 years, right? So you have to leave enough money to actually cover those prayers, right? Or if you have the missed fast, those fasts have to be covered. So you have to, make sure all those unfulfilled religious duties are taken care of, right? And then, how about the will? Can it be modified? Once I make a will, can I modify it, right? As long as I'm alive, I can actually modify the will. And whatever is the last version, that actually will stand, okay? The other part is that, when it comes to the property, right, there is two elements of it. One is the actual will part, right, which is the wasiya, and then the other part is the inheritance part. So there's two parts to your estate. So let me explain what it means, right? The inheritance part and the wasiya part. The wasiya part, actually a will part, only applies to 1/3 of your estate. So that's where you can actually do whatever you want to do. The other inheritance part is based on whatever instructions on the Quran and Hadith is there, based on the Sharia. That's the inheritance part. So there you cannot control what's going to happen. It has to happen based on Sharia. Now, this 1/3 part of the will, there you actually have complete freedom to do whatever you want to do with whatever you want to dispose of it, right? And then, this, one thing is something especially more important as you live in Western countries, right? If you don't make a will, it ends up in probate, and then it's going to go get decided based on the state law and all those things, right? It is highly recommended to, as far as I'm personally concerned, is to recommend to you, go work out with a trust fund lawyer and a will lawyer, and then there is Sharia lawyers too that can help you do those wills, right? But just make sure that, especially in the Western countries, you make a will, right? So that actually can happen based on the way the Sharia is defined for us. Now, the estate distribution steps, right? First is, you clear the debts, you pay the funeral expenses, right? And then you basically, whatever instructions are there for the 1/3 of the estate, that needs to happen. And then you divide the remainder based on the Islamic Sharia, whatever is there to do. Now, you can use the 1/3 to do whatever you want, like I said. So you can use it for charity. You can give it to people who are not your heirs, for example, right? Or you can use it to share imbalances, right? One of the things interesting in Islam is the fact that, you have the son receives twice amount of the daughter, right? That's the general rule. Now, there's other things happening, right? But that's the general rule. Now, the reason for the daughter to receive half is because when she gets married, she actually gets nafaka or maintenance from her husband's side. So that is an obligation on the husband or the male. So that's why when he is married, he has to provide for his family, he has to provide for his wife. So hence there is extra responsibility or financial responsibility, hence the male gets more. Now, Interestingly, my daughter questioned me the other day about my own will. So I said, there is another option to do where you have your 1/3 of your estate that is left to your discretion. So you can actually use that 1/3 to make a fair share out of it. There is no obligation on you to actually not do it. So you can take that 1/3 and you can redivide it because you have freedom to do whatever you want. So you can redivide it where it becomes equally distributed between your children, if that's what you want to do. So that helps address the that part of it. Now, a little bit about the father's Quran, father's ring, father's sword or weapons or clothes. That actually belongs to the eldest son, right? And now, if the wealth is not as much, where there's more debts, then the son actually has to pay out of his own pocket, right, or sell those things to make that debt whole, right? An interesting one is, this is a lot of soap operas and dramas people watch, right? What, there is a wasi and there's a rich man, and then, there's everybody plotting to kill him, right? For example, right? Because they want to receive the inheritance. And the interesting answer to that is that if you unjustly kill somebody, you cannot inherit their inheritance. So you basically get eliminated from their inheritance, right? So, unless it's done in a religious duty or self-defense, right? That those are different scenarios, but you cannot just unjustly kill somebody so you can inherit the money, because that actually will automatically disqualify you. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wala sarinna al-insana lafi khusrin illa allazina amanu wa amilus salihati wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Inna Allaha malaikatahu yusalluna 'alan nabiy ya ayyuhallazina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. So I talked a little bit about preparing for your family for their, after you depart, right? There's also one interesting thing that I want to actually strongly recommend, right? This is something when I was fairly younger, right? One of the things I worried about was I was the sole bread earner for the family, right? So you always are wondering, like, what if something happens to me? How does my family get taken care of if something happens to me? So one of the ways that you can actually protect your family legally per Islam and this country is actually the idea of insurance, right? Buying life insurance, buying home insurance, right? Buying property insurance. Now, there is a dispute between the Sunni scholars and the Shia scholars, right? Sunni scholars actually don't allow the use of insurance, right? And they say it because it's a kind of transaction where there is no trade or no partnership happening, right? So that's kind of their disagreement. But however, they say that, if there was a type of gift or donation that you do that might have a sort of conditional compensation, in that case, it may be allowed under certain circumstances, right? But, those are actually also far removed. I'm actually reading a ruling from their side, right? So let me talk to you a little bit about this in a general sense, right? So first of all, there's three types of, things you can, when you give something to somebody, there's three types of intentions, right? One is where you actually give a hadiah, gift to somebody out of love and respect for them. So you like somebody, you love them, you respect them, you give a gift. The other one is sadaqah, right? You give it for, fi sabilillah, so, qurbatan ilallah. So you're doing it for the sake of Allah. However, there is also another kind of gift in Islam, which is called hiba. So hiba you can do where you don't have to take any of those two motives into consideration. So you're not doing it out of love, or you're not doing it out of, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Now, hiba can be one where I can give it without any condition. I'm just giving it to you, and the condition is you accept it, it's done. Now, there's also another type of gift where I can give you a gift with the condition that I receive some sort of compensation in return, right? And, in the case of a conditional gift, the giver cannot ask it back unless the condition is fulfilled. So that kind of gives you the background around insurance, for example, right? In insurance, what are you doing, right? You're actually agreeing to pay a certain amount, right? Annually, monthly, whatever it is, right, over a period of time. And then, the insurer is pledging to pay a certain amount of money, whether gradually or one time, right, to the insured party or the beneficiary in case something happens. right? So that's a good example of insurance. So what are the types of insurance? You have life insurance, you have health insurance, right? You have car, house, all those types of insurance, right? The simple contract is that you have a proposal by an insurer, right? You accept that from the insurance company, right? And then you specify who's going to get the benefit, and there is a beginning and the end term to the insurance. So that just gives you a general framework for what the insurance means, right? Now it is essential that the cause of loss, for example, right, whatever the cause of loss is, when you're expecting that compensation back, must be defined. So that may be a death, illness, drowning, sinking, fire. You have to specify under what condition you would get the loss. And then the premium must be also specified, whether it's monthly, whether it's annually, and what period of time you want to do. Now, the simplest way to look at it is, from a Shia perspective, right? Our Mujtahideen have looked at this, and they call insurance as a conditional gift. So what you do in that case is, you're giving the premiums as a gift to the insurance company. And then you are putting the condition in there that, in case of a loss, could be caused by illness, death, fire to himself or his property, right? That insurer turns around and gives him the compensation back for it. So that just gives you an idea about how that works out. Salawat. So now let's go back to what I talked about earlier, was that I want to talk to you about what Imam Ali's will was, right? What did he talk about in Nahj al-Balagha when we started with Luqman, right? And I gave you a little bit idea about, wasiyah. I gave you a little bit idea about, insurance, right? To protect your family, right? Now this is all about, a personality like Imam Ali. What is he telling his sons, right? That's something that, we should all take very seriously. The first and foremost thing he warned about is to have taqwa and fear of Allah. Because if you don't have taqwa, right, essentially, the hadith is there that, the only thing that's going to be measured when you show up in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the amount of taqwa you're taking in. Because you can do a lot of good deeds, but if the taqwa or the intention is not clear, it's not going to matter. Right? All going to go to waste. And then you should have fear of Allah in all your dealings. So when you have fear of Allah in all your dealings, you will always be careful and making sure you're doing the right things. Adhere to the teachings of the Quran, right? I talked a lot about yesterday in my lecture, right? What Imam Ali talked about, the benefits of, following the Quran in terms of understanding it. And then following the sunnah of our Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this was the foundation of Imam Ali's character. Everything that you saw him do, right, was in light of those particular features, right? He had taqwa, he had fear of Allah, he followed the Quran, and he had ultimate devotion to our Prophet, right? And that was the foundation of everything. Then he interestingly talked about, what did he talk about? About prayer, importance of salat. What did Luqman say? Fear of Allah, right? Don't do shirk. And what is the next thing? He said prayer. Imam Ali is saying prayer. He says, communication with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the foundational pillar of Islam. And that helps with our, spiritual development, right? And then one of the most important characteristics, right, he fought 3 wars, right? He fought the wars against the people who broke their promise, right? That was Jamal. He fought against the people who were unjust, meaning they actually never accepted Islam in the first place, right? And then you had, he fought against the people who thought they were holier than Imam Ali, right? So we are more right than you, right? That was the Kharijis, for example, right? The second one was Siffin with Muawiyah. So, one of the important characteristics of Imam Ali, right, if you look at it, was his whole Khilafah or rulership was based on social justice and good personal conduct, right? And he emphasized justice as a core principle of Islamic governance and personal conduct. He said you should have justice and in your dealings with everybody, right? So when he advocated fairness in all dealings, and he also said pay special attention to people who are vulnerable. So the poor, the needy, right? Make sure they are not getting crushed by the society, right? Make sure there is fairness and justice to all. He also talked about unity and brotherhood, right? He was very fervent. We sometimes see so many lectures, right, where we are always put, us against them. But here in his wasiya, he's actually calling for Muslim unity. And he says if there's Muslim unity, there's prosperity that comes out of that brotherhood. And you can see the consequences of this disunity that is going on in the Islamic world right now. Where Muslims are suffering everywhere because Muslims are disunited. And that's where he's warning about division in the Muslim Ummah. And then he says, if you're in a ruling position, right, you should always rule with justice, equality, and compassion. And then, he says the justice, when you're a leadership position, not only should you be just, but you should be readily available and responsive to everybody who's got a need, right? A lot of, management techniques say open door policy, right? Whenever you need, just walk into my office and I'll help you, for example. So you have to be responsive to and then, ethics in personal conduct. So now, talked about general, but now your own personal conduct. And what did he say? He says, patience, humility, modesty, and simplicity. What did Luqman say? Don't be arrogant. Be humble. Imam Ali is, this is the interesting part. A lot of people question Nahjul Balagha, right? As far as, the authenticity of Nahjul Balagha. But, when you go look at the teachings and the core concepts of Nahjul Balagha, and then you look at the book of the Hadith, right, on a lot of people, you will find that, Nahjul Balagha actually fits like a hand in a glove when it comes to the Quran. And then when you look at the Hadith books, they are not actually organized, or they don't talk about generally, what the Quran is talking about. Whereas in Nahjul Balagha, everything that Imam Ali is saying is all coming from the Quran. And he talks about not being extravagant, right? Don't be over excessive in your spending. We talked about this yesterday, right? In the 10 Commandments, right? What did Allah say, right? He emphasized charity, right? And this is the month of doing charity, right? And in the month of charity, when you give $1, for example, Allah gives the example that's like, 7 grains of corn and 7 corns of grain. And then each corn has 700 grains. And then he says, I multiply on top of it to whosoever I want. And then he says, in the light of Laylatul Qadr, it's like 1,000 months. So it multiplies. But then on the other hand, he says, don't be wasteful. I see a lot of people, right, we try to do charity over excessive. And then Allah says in the Quran, he doesn't like the people who waste. He says, don't be the person whose hands are tied or chained to their neck, where you give so much that you don't have money yourself. And that's a very, sad concept. On one hand, we have to do charity, right? And, Rasulullah says in his hadith, right, that he says, no, you need to be the hand that gives. You need to have the upper hand. You don't want to be the person whose hand is below. Because if your hand is below, you're in a beneath position. So, and then he emphasizes that when you give, don't have pride in when you give. And then don't resort to begging. But if you give too much, guess what? You now tied yourself up where you can't meet the obligations and the duties and responsibilities that you have. Controlling anger, forgiving others, right? Maintaining integrity in all your dealings. We heard about it yesterday too. When you do business, right, you have to have ethics, morals, and integrity in everything that you do. Interesting, right? When you look at this, it like subhanAllah, right? Everything that, Imam Ali is talking about is matching the Quran word for word. And then he continues, he says, make sure you keep your duties to your families, your neighbors, your society, and then he emphasized the importance of charity. He also talked about, as individuals, we need to focus on knowledge. Now, I personally believe there is no age for getting knowledge. I hear a lot of people, I'm too old now, so I can't learn anything more. Imam Ali says you have to constantly strive for knowledge and wisdom, so that you can gain a deep understanding of your own religion. And he highlights the importance of consultation or shura, right? Meaning getting together, seeking advice from people who know, so you can actually resolve your differences and learn from the experiences of your community. And then in his final words, right, he says, basically he's emphasizing the fact that, this dunya is transient. We learned that in Surah Al-Kahf, right, that the whole world is transient. Everything in this dunya is just for this dunya. And then, he says it's imperative that you prepare for your akhirah, right? And you need to prepare for your akhirah that you can secure a, dignified position in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't be trying to be the person. Of course, when you look at Surah Waqia, right, there's three types of people. The people on the left who are going to, go to hell, but then you have the people on the right, they're going to get Jannah, but then there's Sabiqun as well, the people who are foremost in the race. Ulaik al-muqarrabun, they are going to be the ones closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you have to prepare for not this dunya, you have to prepare for your akhirah. Let's ask, on behalf of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad to, and to use the inspiration of martyrs of Karbala to stand up against injustice wherever it may be found. ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا وأخواتنا ربنا إننا آمنا فاغفر لنا وذنوبنا وقنا عذاب النار اللهم إني أعوذ بك من فتنة النار وأعوذ بك من فتنة القبر وأعوذ بك من فتنة الغنى وأعوذ بك من فتنة القبر اللهم اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء والأموات تابع بيننا بينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك على كل شيء قدير إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما